Hello, hello. Welcome all. So nice to see so many folks. Hello. Welcome, welcome.
Jeremy. Hi.
Hi. Hi. Cool.
Hey, nice to see you.
As people start kind of falling in, we'll get started. Maybe just another minute. Hello, hello. Welcome. Welcome all. I say let's get started as most folks are here. Hello everyone. My name is Jenna Caravello. I am a professor in the Department of Design Media Arts. Thank you so much for coming. Before we get started, an important land acknowledgement. The Department of Design Media Arts at UCLA acknowledges our presence on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Kizh, Gabrielino, Tongva peoples. I am so excited to introduce our speakers for today, Brenna Murphy and Birch Cooper of Mshr. These two artists I have admired for quite a while. I had the pleasure of seeing them perform live once and they blew my mind. We are going to have a Q&A session after their talk today for about 15 minutes, so please post your questions for them in the chat. And before they get started, I'm going to read a more formal introduction. Mshr is the art collective of Birch Cooper and Brenna Murphy. The duo collaboratively builds and explores systems composed of sound, light, sculpture, software, and circuitry. Their practice is a self-transforming cybernetic entity with its outputs patched into its inputs, the resulting emergent form serving as its navigational system. These outputs primarily take the form of installations and performances that integrate interface design with generative systems and a distinctive formalist approach. Mshr's name is a modular acronym designed to hold varied ideas over time. And now I'm going to hand it over to our guests, Brenna and Birch.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jenna. We're so happy to be here, and thank you all for attending our talk.
We're honored to appear before you.
So, yeah, we are MSHR or Mshr, and this is actually our 10th anniversary of our collective this year.
Our 10-year anniversary.
We've been working together since 2011 in this collective, and before that we were in a larger collective, Oregon Painting Society, for 4 years.
Beginning in 2007. Yeah, and so I guess I'll just go right into it. Our work as MSHR or Mshr is really informed by the process and working methods that we developed in Oregon Painting Society. Yeah, maybe it's time to start screen sharing, actually.
Yeah, we like to start by talking about Oregon Painting Society when we talk about Mshr, because that's really like our origin story and kind of the reason why we consider ourselves to be an art collective versus just two people. We kind of like come with this group mentality.
Yeah, Oregon Painting Society was a big group. Its numbers changed over time, but I guess it's at its stable state. It was about 5 or 6 members, and we had different backgrounds and different mediums that we worked in, and we sort of did a very worlding-centric exploration that involved sculpture, performance, installation, video, instrument design, basically whatever was needed or interesting to us became part of the process and part of the practice. and it was a really shared process where any idea was sort of incorporated into the system, and it could be used by anyone else or changed or even deleted by anyone else. So here's an installation we did at the art school in Portland, PNCA. It had interactive sound elements, sound and light elements, and we did a performance at the opening, which was a really common thing for us at that time.
And I think it's worth noting that like we all came from music backgrounds as well as art backgrounds, and
many of us at least.
In some ways we were kind of, or at least we all came from like music communities, and so we kind of were taking the band model and using it to make art as well, and kind of working in both music and art worlds. So when Organ Painting Society disbanded in 2011, Birch and I formed MSHR as a kind of offshoot from that kind of the methodology and mentality that we had built in Organ Painting Society was the sort of seed of MSHR.
Yeah, so that's why we self-identify as an art collective. And it defines a lot about our working methods, although the work has changed a lot since then in some ways.
And so going into Mshr, we always have a hard time knowing where to begin because we see our practice as very rhizomatic. Like, you know, all the elements of it are going into all the other elements. And so we find it's best in a presentation to just kind of dive into one element and find our pathway from there.
Yeah, any perspective will lead to the other perspectives. So because this talk is entitled Sculptural Electronic Systems, we'll start there. And it's a pretty good general topic to talk about our work. This page here is our instruments, some of our instruments that we've made over time. And these instruments are used in our live performance works. And it's not I don't think this page has everything, but it has some systems that we've used over time. These instruments were the first instruments that we ever made, actually.
And so, yeah, a big part of our practice has been circuitry and building analog electronics that are quite simple, but trying to find ways to make them like living systems that we can interact with. So our first synthesizers that we just showed are simply 4 cross-modulating square wave oscillators.
Well, yeah, depends on your perspective. Yeah, they're really rudimentary. Actually, really similar to. It's become kind of a classic design for me, sort of playing this internal architecture of one digital logic chip as an analog circuit. And there's actually a lot to explore in there sonically, not just 4 cross-modulating oscillators, but also the way the chip collapses on itself when you feed it back on itself or give it less voltage. Anyways.
So these synthesizers were developed for performance and for playing music, but the development of them has been in conversation with our installations. So I think we'll jump over to an installation an early installation that shows the beginnings of our development of light and sound interaction.
Yeah, I wanted to add that interface design has been a really important dimension to this work. And that sort of goes back to Organ Painting Society. We started making our own instruments, which were basically simple electronics attached or embedded in sculptures. And those were also, those were used in our performances as instruments for ourselves to use, and also were for our installations. And it became clear that the interaction between visitors to the installations and these systems that would generate light and sound interactions, the important part was the interaction. And so we began to really emphasize these poetic interfaces or interactions that people would have with these systems. And so we've come to think about the work a lot in terms of interface. And then I guess the other side of that is the system that you're interfacing with. This piece that Brenna's showing us is a series that we did called Ceremonial Chamber, where we first began exploring feedback systems between light and sound in our work. This was a interactive installation piece where visitors to the installation could control this feedback system or steer or modulate this feedback system by moving around these sensors on top of this plexiglass sheet. Below the sheet, there was a translucent print sandwiched between two clear plexiglass layers, and then a bunch of sound reactive lights. So these incandescent bulbs were turning on based on different frequencies and volumes of incoming sound, and the sound was turning on based on different intensities of different bulbs.
And there were two tables so that people could play together, and multiple sensors on each table. So the idea was, it wasn't just one person playing it, but anyone in the room could all kind of start to play music together by moving these sculptural pieces. And we did maybe like 5 or 6 iterations of this installation, mostly in 2013. Maybe we should play a little clip.
Sure.
So as we developed this installation, we realized at some point that we could kind of modify that system and that interface to work well for performance as well as installation.
And so the performance version of this sort of like liquefied the system into something that was a lot more flexible and, like, I guess, higher risk for the interaction, since interactive sound and light installation really needs to function, like actually work. But in our performances, the possibility of failure is sort of a different.
It's part of
it's
what
more,
gets us.
It's more built in, yeah. So we were able to make a system that was a lot more flexible and portable for our performance work. And I think this sort of touches on an idea that I wanted to mention in our work. I think that there's a kind of a thread in our practice has been sort of seemingly contradictory ideas that are sort of revealed to be closely related. And this was something that we sort of ran into when we started integrating these generative or cybernetic systems into our performance. We were sort of faced with this question of what's the relationship between free improvisation and generative music. They're sort of like seemingly opposite approaches to sound making, but I feel like when you view them both in terms of cybernetics, they're sort of the same, just with humans as agents in the system.
And we're really compelled by that role of being like the human in interacting with this kind of non-human system that's like living in its own way.
And I think that that has been another thread in our work where we interact in an improvisational way with inhuman systems that have a lot of influence on the outcome of the work. And so present improvisation with these systems is a big part of our process.
Mm-hmm. And so like these performances kind of have crystallized over time in different ways over the past 10 years as we've been like performing regularly throughout that time, and our performances go through different phases, like slowly changing, but they always are compositions that are based on a series of interfaces and systems and improvisations within those sections.
Yeah.
So we'll kind of compose them as like first this interface and system, and then really improvise, not knowing what will happen within that system, and then at some point switch to the next one. This has kind of been how we've composed our performances.
Yeah, that's true.
And yeah, a big influence for us in our improvisation style, I guess, has been our relationship with the tenses, Juicy Fruit Meat and Rock and Roll Jackie, aka Oblivia, who are also, they're also part of LAFMS, the Los Angeles Free Music Society, and Smegma. And they've been kind of mentors to us. They're amazing improvisers, really coming out of like free improv and experimental music. And we've been very lucky to get to jam with them a lot over the years. And
yeah, that's true. And I think maybe another important, if we're talking about influential people in our music, I think it's worth mentioning like David Tudor and his collaborators in terms of approaches to handmade electronic systems that involve feedback and interface design.
Mm-hmm. So maybe switching gears to back to our sculpture installations.
Sure.
So we had a long period of doing these ceremonial chamber installations that we showed before in 2013 and 2014. And in 2014, we, I guess, developed our next phase of installations, which we called Resonant Hypersymbol Modulator. And this was also based on systems of light audio feedback, but it took out the kind of direct interaction from the visitors and in place of a more indirect interaction. So the system was set up to run itself and change over time, but as the visitors walked through and explored the installation, their shadows would influence changes. So
yeah, sort of just emphasizing more the generative system and less the interface. I think this series also touches on another important point in our work, which is the relationship between electronic music or sound and virtual sculpture. That's been a sort of unanswerable question in our work.
Usefully unanswerable,
yeah.
because it kind of compels us to keep questioning like what that relationship is.
Yeah, it's been an ongoing sort of inquiry for us. We, I guess I can briefly talk about how virtual sculpture became part of our work. I think it initially came out of Brenna's practice, which was based in collage, digital collage.
Well, I think it's a kind of complicated mash of influences.
Yeah.
I was working a lot in collage and using found digital elements. I was very attracted to like the quality of digital sculpture. And so I learned how to use Blender and make my own digital 3D renderings. But I would say that like my approach to that sculpting was like deeply influenced by the aesthetics that we developed in Oregon Painting Society and the sculptural sensibility that we developed in that collective. And that kind of like guided me into like the virtual design.
And so seeing Brenna's initial virtual sculptures during the time of Oregon Painting Society, I was immediately struck by how resonant that work felt with electronic music and the types of aesthetics and formal qualities and maybe even process-oriented aspects of that work that we were exploring. And so I wanted to get into it too. And we've, I guess since then, we've had a really tight feedback loop with each other's virtual sculptural work and between virtual sculpture and electronic music. And that's been present in the majority of our work in recent years. Both, I'm sorry, both in terms of physical installations that use digital fabrication, like the ones that we just showed.
And that you're seeing now.
Yeah.
Well, I guess this one's not.
And also in audiovisual pieces that use renderings.
I guess since we're on that, should we continue with this, or should we jump over to, maybe now's a good time to jump over to our 2 years ago, I guess now, we made this audiovisual composition in the form of a book, record, website, video, t-shirt. And in this project, we were really trying to zero in on that unanswerable question for us of the relationship between sound and sculpture in our work. So we were developing a series of digital sculptures and renderings of them, and at the same time developing a series of sounds made with digital, with Super Collider, which is a program for creating electronic music through code.
In feedback systems with our analog synthesizers. So this album is sort of our, in a way, sort of I guess we finally like accepted concrete music as a compositional method in our work, which is very logical actually, but because we had been so concerned with improvisation and generative systems prior to that, it was something that we resisted. But in this piece, we in this album, we made concrete compositions using recordings of these generative systems. Anyways.
So these sculptures, we think of them like as like the forms and the textures and the relationships between them. We really think about them in relation to the sounds that were developed alongside them. I could play a little clip of
Well,
here.
actually, let's play the video.
Okay.
But I wanted to say that it's a really non-linear relationship, and I think it has more to do with the process of making it than the outcome. And we've identified a few elements of that process that are, I think, important to this relationship, and that's basically present improvisation with algorithmic systems and procedure.
So here's a video that kind of brings together these sounds and sculptures.
We won't play the whole video.
So maybe jumping back to our installations.
Yes. Are you moving to the virtual reality stuff?
Yeah.
Okay. So there is
Well,
this
maybe
is a non-linear
these are...
path, so I think that's okay. We're not concerned with following a timeline.
I think it's worth saying in the last, maybe, I guess, looking at this, it would be the last 4 or 5 years. Our installation work has followed maybe two kind of parallel paths, branching off from the earlier installations that we shared. One is very based in analog electronics and circuitry and physical sculpture. And the other is based in virtual reality that has like a kind of nested relationship with the physical room. And in both of those parallel explorations, they share a lot of similarities in terms of how the user or the visitor is engaging with the system and how the system unfolds. But they're working in very different kinds of mediums. So right now we're looking
This is a sort of like a cybernetic, all analog sound and light system installation that was developed for a show with Harvest Works in New York. And
I think the one right after that one really shows the...
And yeah, this was a completely, I would say, relatively closed system that the goal of it was basically to be high complexity and produce an infinitely unfolding, non-repeating output. But directly following this installation, we made we decided to start incorporating visitor presence into that system as a way of increasing the complexity of the system, and as a way of, we found it nice to include visitor presence as part of the system. So this changes the feedback system between light and sound that brings different elements in and out of the feedback system as visitors move around through these gates, sort of almost like metaphorical and literal logic gates.
And the same year that we developed and made this installation, we made our first virtual reality installation, which used the same format of a system changing that relied on visitors' presence and visitors walking through archways.
Yeah, we kept that. I guess that basic format was maintained, but all of the installation, well, actually, a strong part of the installation was virtual, and all the audio was computer generated as a live cybernetic system that would change based on triggers provided by the visitors. But this series, something that I enjoy about this series is that it uses nested physical and virtual levels, and sort of, so it's a,
yeah, like, I mean, it was, you want to pause that?
sure.
It was pretty obvious for us to start using virtual reality because we were working in digital sculpture and we were working in installation. So we were, thinking sculpturally about, and in a spatial physical way about digital sculpture. And so when this technology became accessible to us, we started experimenting with it. And it was really important. We felt what we were interested in virtual reality for is the kind of hyper physical reality state that you can get to in the virtual, we're interested in that weird tension between digital and physical space. And so our installations and in this series they map virtual space onto the physical.
And I'd like to add on to that. The physical prints that are on the floor and the walls, as Brenna said, map directly onto the virtual spaces. But they are also diagrammatic of the interaction between the virtual reality user and the virtual reality space and the generative audio system that's unfolding in the physical space. So another important element of this work is sort of that the score of the work is also the form of the work. So the physical layout of this piece is a description of how the system works that's actually spatially interacted with by visitors to the piece. And in this particular installation that we did last year in Tokyo, the virtual space cycles between these 4 different scapes, each of which is a cross-section of the overall generative system, which are represented here in black and white.
So for instance, like each of these sculptures represents a different element of the audio system, like,
and of the virtual system and of the physical interaction.
I want to give an example.
Sure. It's like the elements in the making a cross-like shape represent the 4 different gates that are used as triggers, and then the where the mouse is hovering now represents a generative voice or sound producing unit which is acted on by these smaller units, which are modulators. And the voices and modulators are randomized each time a visitor goes through the gate. And if you move to the bottom left, or the bottom left and bottom right, they both show kind of flow paths representing the feedback systems within the sound producing system, where each generative audio voice is tracking off of the one before it in a circle.
So then you can see that this diagram, which is like, and all these lines are showing the connections between the different elements. This diagram was turned into this image, which is just like basically a colorized version of the diagram, and then printed out and put on the floor. So it becomes like the physical score for the visitor to walk through. And then the virtual installation that's mapped on top of it corresponds with the placement of the elements in the diagram.
And the sculptural elements in the virtual installation are sort of three-dimensional projections of these two-dimensional forms.
So as you can see, we really enjoy building and exploring these systems.
And I just wanted to mention that we started doing this diagrammatic work sort of as a response to also to David Tudor's work, where we saw a show that contained a lot of these aestheticized flowchart diagrams that basically served as scores and explanations of how his circuit conglomerates were composed. And we were like, okay, that's great. We're going to do that too, basically, because we have this, but applying our specific visual language to these systems.
And maybe now we can talk about what we're working on right now. We have a few things going on somehow still.
Well, maybe we can just talk about this year, actually.
Yeah, and this makes me think of this.
Oh, okay.
Which is one thing that we're doing right now is putting out an album that is a kind of crystallized presentation documenting our live performances from around like 2017, maybe like 2014 to 2017. We had a kind of very crystallized composition that we performed during that time. And through a residency that we had a few years ago, we were able to make recordings documenting that composition. And so we've now been working on putting together writings and diagrams depicting the systems that we used in that performance. And it's going to be put out as an album in a few months. So that's something that we've been working on.
Yes. Yeah, and so maybe it's appropriate to mention that I feel like an important part of our work has been where we've been to. The first handful of years that we were operating as MSHR, we were based in Portland, and we sort of flickered into living in New York, where we operated for 2 years, which enabled a whole different set of possibilities for us. And then we abruptly transitioned into a state of constant travel between residency programs, exhibitions, tours, performance tours, and also just kind of dropping in on different communities and seeing what they were up to.
Yeah, and that mode of living kind of made the most sense for our work, because our work has been so event-based, both the installations and the performances. So we always have to like travel in order to create the work, and then being part of meeting communities in different places in the world who are into the same kinds of things as us has been an important part of that journey also.
Yeah, we've been very fixated on underground art and music communities.
So we were traveling without a home base for 2 years and had plans to continue doing that when the pandemic hit. So,
so now everything is online, of course, and luckily for us, we had a strong virtual dimension to our practice, and so we've been able to transition over to that. Maybe we could show our video from Barcelona.
mm-hmm.
One of our projects that we did this year was we were able to still participate in a festival in Barcelona that we had meant to travel to perform, but instead it was a low capacity screening and an online streaming of video work is what it transitioned into, and luckily our practice, that's part of our work. So we were able to make this piece, which was shown in an immersive projection space.
And the next thing that we're going to be doing is creating an audiovisual composition, interactive, generative, as usual, but in the form of a browser-based virtual space. So it will be premiering in a few months through a festival online, and people will be able to play the composition by navigating through this virtual space in their browsers and interacting with the space.
And so this work is like drawing really from our installation practice. And we're very excited to explore the different set of possibilities made possible by this totally virtual format.
Feels appropriate for the times.
So, okay, so we could maybe just play a moment of this video.
Sure. Yeah, maybe we'll just play a moment with this video, and then we'll be ready to take any questions or conversation if anyone has. Yeah, but we'll play a moment of this video first.
So I'll cut into a random point on this piece. Well, we can't play the whole video now, but it's on our website if you'd like to see it.
Yeah, I think that will wrap up our talk, and we'd love to talk with you guys if you have any comments or questions.
Thank you so much for that. That was fantastic. We have a couple questions from Amaya. She asked, "Are those actual digital logic diagrams?" Which piece were you looking at, Amaya? I'm looking for.
They are, though. It does.
Sort of. I mean, they're not like, you couldn't build a circuit based on them, but they're sort of depending on the piece.
But you could
they're,
build the system. They are meant to be.
yeah, actually, maybe I'll screen share really quickly here and answer the question. In this piece, well, in this piece, the diagrams show more like different modules, whether they're like a synthesizer module or an interface object. Like in the case of this one, it uses our hands in part of the diagram because we're playing by touching each other. So it's a flow chart describing how the system's composed or compiled. And then let's see, I'd like to show our Museum of Art and Design piece. In this piece,
This is the first time that we did that.
we made this flow chart basically showing the different sculptural modules. Each of those modules contains a specific type of circuit base, and so each form directly correlates to a circuit. And this shows how those circuits are patched together, but in a generalist way, so that each time, like our hope was that maybe when we're like physically obliterated and dust, someone else could put this piece together by going to our storage unit, getting out all of the sculptural elements and putting it together based on this diagram. And a big part of putting the system together is improvisational. So it's not totally specific. Maybe that answers the question.
That's fascinating. I think selfishly, just because we're already kind of talking about this, my own question for you is if you talk a little bit more about the design of these individual components, kind of the concept that goes behind these biological robotic circuits.
Yeah, we really work in a combination of, where is that?
Go down.
Intuitively and procedurally. That's been like a way for us to think about it, is like procedural approach where we like come up with kind of rules and systems for creating these shapes, but then also really intuitively just following our noses on making forms that feel resonant and that feel like they have some kind of relationship, and especially in this case to the like circuit that is actually embedded inside of them. And you know, our approaches have changed over time, but that kind of like is the basic fundamental approach.
Yeah, so actually these forms are all made using a 3D modeling software, although the end result is a vector that's used to cut out the wood or plexi. So we were able to like maintain the sort of types of procedures and aesthetic approaches that we would use in 3D modeling to produce two-dimensional designs.
That make them three-dimensional.
Yeah. And the relationship between the forms of the sculptures and the types of circuits that they contain, sort of a combination of some kind of literal ideas, some practical concerns for how big something should be, or like how important something is reflected in its size, and then just totally intuitive things too. Like for example, this piece is a quadraphonic panner, so it was really practical to have 4 nodes, or we thought it would make sense to have 4 nodes on it. And maybe another example would be of a more practical design. No, we need more photos of this show actually on our site. This piece here is uses 4 cross-modulating square waves. So we used a sort of square shape and a sort of 4-sided shape. But some of them are less concise and increasingly just intuitive forms.
Cool. And I love the idea that we could build them after we're all dust.
Yeah.
Gareth asks, can you explain a little bit more about how the Oregon Painting Society has shaped this aesthetic?
Sure. Maybe we can go to the website.
Yeah. Yeah, Oregon Painting Society was really based on like complete collaboration.
Sorry.
There it is.
Got it.
We can go back and so we didn't want to be a collective where one person did this thing, one person did this thing. We wanted to be a collective where we all made something together and you couldn't say who made what. So out of that collaboration, we really were influenced by the kind of vision of the other people in the collective. And we kind of created this visual language together that was very specific, I think. These certain forms, we were very obsessed with shapes and colors and somehow creating this meaning that we all understood through them. And so that visual language certainly has been embedded in our minds ever since.
Installation pics. Yeah, it was, but radical collaboration was a really important emphasis in this group. And that was just, I mean, different things could be said about it, but I think it's a very practical approach if you're doing big group collaboration. I think there needs to be, or it's very sensible to have complete mutual ownership of every aspect. And so it was this sort of society where we developed, it was this sort of socialist or communist anarchist society where ownership and responsibility was shared equally between everyone. And that's stuck with us. Here's an installation we did that was sort of very much in support of a performance where we improvised with these systems for the duration of the opening.
Yeah.
Maybe that answers the question a little bit.
Yes. Any other questions from folks who are currently muted? We can unmute you. Brenda.
Hi.
Hi, Brenna.
Yeah, I get to meet you guys.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, sure. And I told you how much I loved your website, which I thought was great. So I'm aged out of clubs, but when I was club age appropriate, the kind of visuals that you've provided, especially with the work that's a installation sculpture, have you been invited to current, I think the music now is EDM or AMD, whatever that is. I'm a house head, so I'm older back there. But have you been invited to provide those kinds of visuals? Because the light thing is it's exactly what I grew up with in the clubs I went. And I hear now that's very expensive and nobody does that anymore. So I was wondering, have you been invited to provide your artwork as sculpture and light?
Yeah, we have had some crossover with club culture, and we think that's really interesting.
Yeah, mostly in doing DJ sets, because that's easier, I guess. We have done a few in New York. We did do some sculptural installations that were part of parties.
And actually, we're working on a virtual installation right now for an online club.
That's true, actually. There's this thing called Antibodies, which is it's made out of made from these people who do club nights in New York, and they wanted to have a virtual version. So they created this actually amazing platform where people can come and party together and hang out. And they asked us to make an installation for that.
and DJs will be playing it. And it's a context that we're interested in. I don't know. It has a, I think the way audio is used in a club, I think is really fascinating. I love the architectural, like very direct aspect of that. And I love the sound systems, obviously. And another kind of interesting point of overlap in the past year is that we had the opportunity to make 2 remixes for artists that make club music. And that's really not something that's been part of our vocabulary as artists, but we were honored to try, and so those also exist.
That's great. I mean, because I could totally see you in the DJ spaces. I haven't been to Coachella, but I have a friend at DMA that goes every year. And I know that a couple of DJs that I still follow, they had these big tent events. And I was just like, wow, for them to be out in the desert with your lighting system and the way it goes with the bass and everything, it would be awesome. Thank you for being here. It's been wonderful listening to you talk about your work.
Oh, thank you so much
for having us.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, we're into that that point of overlap.
Any other questions from our, I want to call it an audience. But it's a gallery. Some questions from Jennifer. Where is your browser project premiering, and can we come?
Yeah, it'll be, the festival is called Rewire. It's based in Belgium. And I think it will be premiered in April. So I don't have like a link for it, but if you keep an eye out for Rewire Festival.
Yeah, look at their website. I
think they're going to make the announcement maybe like next week or so.
Yeah, and actually Brenna for that festival is also making a collaboration with a club musician.
Sort of club. She maybe you guys know her. She's from LA. Her name is Maral. And she and I are collaborating for the festival also. I'm making visuals for her sound. And we're kind of building it together back and forth.
Yeah. So yeah, please come.
And other questions from Jennifer. Do you mint your work, or are you interested in NFTs?
You know, our work has never been really, we've never worked with selling it. And I'm interested in this NFT thing, but I also kind of hate it. I hate false scarcity in digital art. And I feel, I understand that artists need to get paid. And for us, the way that we've been able to get paid is through events. But so we haven't had to like, I don't know, that's just the way it's worked out. But I actually just wrote a note to myself this morning, like investigate NFTs and that whole like, you know, economy of artworks, and like try to write an essay about it or something to make myself like understand my feelings about it. But I'm, yeah, I don't know. It's complicated. I don't like scarcity, and I don't like consumerism around art in a way. It's, yeah, I don't, my position is not fully formed right now.
Yeah, but yeah, we've had a really, I'm not searching for the right word. We haven't aligned ourselves with the art market.
We have, in a way, we have worked with a lot of galleries who were trying to sell our work a lot, but they were never really able to do it, which I kind of am glad about almost, because we had to come up with this other way of supporting ourselves.
I don't think we had, I mean, we did come up with it, but the way that we support ourselves has been a really natural result of our practice, a really natural outcome from the type of work we do. Obviously, it doesn't just, we had to like, you know, work to develop it in a way that would actually be sustainable. But, you know, the problem with consumerism and capitalism in art is that it produces certain types of things that work for that system. And so if that's your game, then you have to make certain types of things, basically. And I think that's a really not a great thing, actually.
But obviously we are all stuck in that system and have to like figure out our way through it
Yeah,
the best we
of
can.
course. And wouldn't it be nice to just make prints and sell them, or make virtual sculptures and sell them? Maybe, I don't know, depends. I don't know.
I think it's very interesting, something to discuss.
Jennifer has some resources for you if you want to.
In chat.
Jennifer, if you want to post those in the chat, you are fully welcome, or maybe to email Brenna and Birch.
Oh, you asked
yeah.
about the antibodies.
Yeah,
link.
please email us if you want to send us some stuff. And antibodies, I don't know the link. If you I guess
search-
antibodies is a pretty bad Google search. We will post about it on our Instagrams and on our website when it happens, maybe next month or something. Or if you look up like antibodies New York, like party club, virtual reality, something like that, you might find it.
Yeah. We don't have the link on hand.
Thank you, Brenna and Birch. I cannot thank you enough for talking with us. I'm gonna call it here so that we get to say goodbye and allow you to take a break. Thank you all for coming so much, and it's been great to have you.
Thank you all so much. It's truly an honor to get to share our work with you all. Thank you.
Thanks, DMA Salon. See ya.